Highway 413 would span across the Halton, Peel, and York regions. The Ontario government says it is critical to reducing congestion. Others disagree and say the 400 series road will create more problems than it solves. With us for more, all in Ontario's capital city, Teresa Di Felice, Assistant Vice President of Government and Community at CAA South Central Ontario. Matti Siemiatycki, Professor of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto and Director of the U of T's Infrastructure Institute. And Emma McInstosh, Environment and Investigative Reporter at the Narwhal. Hi, welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Hello.
It seems like this conversation is a hot button issue. Before we get into it, I just wanted to bring up a map to go over where this highway will be. As this map shows, Highway 413, also known as the GTA West Corridor, is proposed to be 59-kilometer, 4 to 6 lane highway running from Highway 400 in Vaughan and curving west to where Highways 401 and 407 meet near Mississauga, Milton, and Halton Hills. It would cut through the regions of York, Peel, and Halton. Teresa, I wanted to start with you. Can you describe the government's rationale for this highway at this time?
So it appears that, there's lots of conversation about reducing congestion, improving commute times. And so I think these are the two factors that the government is trying to focus on. These are always hot button topics. They've been around for a very long time. I participated in many forums. But as we sort of come back out of the pandemic, 19 months that we've had, 20 months that we've had, even at this point where people aren't fully back to work, we're seeing traffic volumes pretty high. I venture, I guess, almost 2/3 of what they were in some parts of the GTA. And so, looking towards the future, if you don't start sort of planning for what's coming, which is a whole lot more population growth in this region, how are we going to deal with some of the challenges that are going to come at that time when we already, have a bit of a problem and have had a problem around congestion for a number of years.
Matti, I want to come to you next because as Teresa mentioned, we've been in a pandemic. It seems like we're in month, 75. And I think a lot of us have been focusing on COVID, vaccine mandate. Parents with autistic children have been asking the government for support. And the government is saying that, this highway will reduce congestion. And we've been hearing that a lot. How does this plan measure up in those terms?
Well, as we come out of the pandemic, people are certainly looking for a new beginning and new alternatives, new ways of doing things. This highway will take us in exactly the wrong direction. This highway will lock in gridlock for generations to come. It will damage the environment at a time when we're grappling with climate change, and it will be terrible for the budget. It is a huge financial hit. Budgeted at $6 billion, but with no numbers currently released. This project is only to go up in costs. The government has also announced that we'll have no tolls on it. So that means that the taxpayers are going to be paying for everyone to use this highway. It will be congested soon after it is built. It will not solve the problems that people are looking to address around congestion, and it will create all sorts of other issues around the environment, social inclusion, pollution, loss of green space, the Greenbelt, farmland. This project really is not what we need coming out of the pandemic, and it'll be bad for the region.
And I'm thinking that if someone from the government was here, they might say that, yes, all those things might be things to consider, but we're coming out of a pandemic, and this obviously will create a lot of new jobs, and it will help the economy of Ontario. What do you say to that?
Construction projects definitely do create jobs, but construction projects in all sectors create jobs. We should be using construction to build the type of infrastructure that will propel us forward coming out of the pandemic. The schools, the long-term care, the affordable housing, transit, dense communities, all of the infrastructure that will put us on a different path and set this region forward to really grow and prosper coming out of the pandemic. We need jobs, and the construction sector is important. When we give people opportunities and when we are employing labor, let's have that labor working towards a different future than the one that's going to lock in pollution and social exclusion.
And Emma, Matti mentioned that this new highway will actually create more congestion. Can you talk to us about the idea of induced demand?
Yeah, so the idea of induced demand is actually decades old, and it's kind of one of the fundamentals of highway planning science. People tend to think that if you build a new road, that opens up flow and that more cars will have room to move. But that's not actually the way it works in real life. New roads tend to attract new drivers or more drivers. There tends to be a short-term benefit, and within a couple of years, the new expanded road is just as crowded as the old one.
Well, Teresa, I think as we've mentioned, the idea around this highway is to stop this congestion because people need to get home to their families. This highway is a resurrection of an old proposal. What's different this time around?
I mean, there's a renewed sense of trying to move forward with a project. I think there has been some redrawing of lines, and I think that still needs to be determined. What's the best path or route if the government does, in fact, decide to proceed with the project once all the sort of reviews happen, and then it determines that this is a project that it's going to stick with. I think that people are frustrated and have been for a long time, and I think they're, even when I sat on the previous premier's transit advisory investment strategy, at the time when we were looking at all the different projects and how to fund transit and build the transit infrastructure in the GTA, even with all of the different relief efforts, it wasn't so much that we were going to reduce congestion as was the big realization. It was to keep it at not getting worse. And as Emily said, induced demand, yes, if you build the lanes, there's going to be cars on them. And I think that, there's a lot of other solutions that need to be part of the solution or be part of addressing the challenges. So great to continue to build transit and invest in transit. There's different fixes that can be done for some problems. Are there tweaks that we can make? Ramp metering, different ways of how we have flow on the traffic to create an ease. But we have to think about what are the best ways. We cannot build enough roads to deal with all of the cars on them. At some point, there is a supply and demand balance that has to be had, and it's like when you outstrip the current demand supply, is this the solution to dealing with demand? And these become very political driven conversations. They get changed, they get canceled depending on who's in, who's out. But the conversation is there and we're having it. So we have to sort of see what's to come over the next little while as they continue to review this.
You brought up transit.
That they want to redo this.
You brought up transit, yeah. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. But I wanted to show you a clip, and this is from Premier Doug Ford. He was in Caledon on Wednesday, selling the highway to potential voters in the upcoming election. Let's take a look at what he said. Sheldon, please roll.
We live in a democracy. The majority of the people want this highway. We're building the highway, and you can't be. You're talking about ideology. You can't sit there like the previous government did for 15 years. The NDP and the Liberals stood by while people were stuck in traffic. We want to make sure that we take care of the people and get them home a lot quicker, to get goods to the market a lot quicker, and just sitting there and telling people, hop on your bicycle or get behind a horse and buggy and start driving, it doesn't cut it. That's the ideology of a lot of people that are from downtown Toronto making their comments about up here in Caledon.
The premier there said that we live in a democracy and that the majority of people want this, but then he went to say that it seems as if this might be a Toronto versus everybody situation. Emma, I wanted to get your read on it. Is opposition to this plan really only a Toronto thing?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a mischaracterization from the premier there. If you look at the municipalities along the route of the 413, most of them have pulled their support, and that's in response to strong opposition from citizens who asked their elected officials to take a stand.
Why are they opposed to it? Why are they opposed to it?
I think a lot of people seem to be really opposed to the environmental impact. COP is going on right now. There's a lot of discussion about reducing carbon emissions, and a lot of people can't really see how A, building a road through the Greenbelt is a good idea, but B, how it makes sense to lock in decades of having more cars that are going to reduce more carbon or emit more carbon and therefore maybe mess with our climate goals.
So why that framing then from the premier?
I think it's an easy ideological wedge, and that's That's something that the Fords in particular found a lot of success with, actually, in Toronto City Council, and I think they're making a bet that they can make the same move and it'll play just as well.
And Matti, we've heard so many different so many reasons behind this. One of them is that people are stuck in traffic. People who take transit also, if you live in different parts of Toronto, it could take you anywhere from 60 minutes to an hour and a half to get home using transit. But the argument that the government is saying is that they want to give people an extra 30 minutes to get home to their family. Why that message?
It's very powerful to provide, to speak to people about getting home quicker. People are stuck in traffic. It is extremely frustrating to be stuck in traffic. And for many parts of the region, the car right now is really the only option. We have built a region that has a dense urban core, but has much of the region is car dependent and car oriented. It was planned that way and it was built that way. And so now people are stuck in traffic and looking for options. And so it's a very powerful message to say, we will build the highways that will deliver you from this terrible gridlock. The problem is that it doesn't work. And the phenomena of induced demand is real. The opposition to this project isn't about ideology. It's about science. It's the science of studying traffic over many years and decades and understanding that this project will not solve the problem. It sounds good in a soundbite, but it doesn't actually address the real underlying problems. And what we need to do is think much more strategically about how this region grows and to invest heavily in public transit, which we've missed for generations, to provide people with true options to get around.
We're going to talk about solutions in a few moments. Yes, yes, go ahead, Emma.
Just to challenge one thing from there, the government's estimate is 30 minutes of time savings. That's highly disputed. A previous study done by the Liberal government in 2017 concluded that the actual time savings were about 30 to 60 seconds on average. So that's a contentious point.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, Teresa, I think if anyone heard you get an extra 30 minutes out of your day, everybody would be like, yes, please, right? But a previous report, as Emma mentioned, said that it would actually be just 30 seconds. How are these numbers then? How do we come up with these numbers?
So, there's various ways to do that. A lot of instances, you can do modeling that can tell you, if you do this and along this route and you put these sort of inputs into it, you can put the existing levels of traffic, the existing density, you can put planned density, and it gives you sort of a predictive model about what the flow could look like, with some degree of certainty and some degree of uncertainty, to be quite honest. And we've seen projects like this in the past. Demand modeling was used for the St. Clair right-of-way. It was used to look at the Gardiner Expressway a few times. It can be challenging. U of T does a lot of, we've worked with projects with U of T and looking at their demand modeling. It's as good as the inputs you put into it with the information you know and can best guess at the time. And so, even from when those studies are done, maybe it was a minute. I don't know what it would be now. It might be 2 minutes. It could be 30 minutes. We're not sure. I think there are studies that can help give you some idea. The government does need to be clear. If they're looking to shave 30 minutes off of people's commute, that's a very aggressive target, considering the levels of congestion we had before the pandemic, what is possibly expected as we come out of the pandemic, with people still not jumping back onto transit. Transit needs to be continued to be built, as Matti said. There needs to be expanded, and the reliability of transit needs to be a factor. But we also, know that, just keeping it at the level it is and trying to save 30 minutes are very different objectives. And
do you think, though, it's misleading? Do you think, though, because we've been hearing, it seems to be a lot of certainty about the 30 minutes, but do you think that it's misleading to then use that as a selling point for this highway?
I think that's the hope, and then that may be an objective. I think that the government's committed money to this and a couple of other two major road projects. They've also committed money to transit. We haven't heard the exact numbers as of yet, and the transit projects are currently being built. So, I also think most Ontarians believe that just building roads aren't the solution. So there's a lot of support for continued expansion of the transit infrastructure, and they're just hopeful that it doesn't get any worse than what it is now. And so I think that some degree of where that target lands of what they're trying to achieve will come out of the studies and the conversations and the evaluations that need to come.
Matti, one of the other reasons that the government is saying that this highway is needed is because they need to prepare for the future and the population is going to grow. Should highways be privileged over transit in those conversations?
No, and one of the things that we know from traffic modeling over the years for big highway projects is that they tend to overestimate the benefits and underestimate the costs. This is research from Professor Ben Fluberg from Oxford University. So this notion that we're going to save 30 minutes on a trip on this highway seems highly unlikely. And the costs of this project have also not been released yet. So we know really we don't have information about how much this is really going to cost. And that's the type of information both on the demand side, but also on the cost side that would be needed. In terms of highways, we've built a region that is really oriented towards the car and oriented towards highways. And people are stuck in traffic now. And the notion that building more highways is going to get us out of this congestion mess is just not realistic. What we need to be doing is planning in a very different way, looking at intensifying, looking at connecting our communities with public transit, bringing all of people's daily needs closer to where they live so that they don't have to travel as far. Coming out of the pandemic, I think people are really looking to live differently, to do things differently. There's an opportunity for change. And going back to just building bigger highways, I think takes us in the wrong direction.
And Emma, when Matti talks about living differently, I think the absolute utopia for everybody would be to be able to walk to work or maybe cycle to work, and that's not the reality. Do you think that does highway infrastructure create a different type of community than building transit does?
Yeah, I think a long history of urban planning shows us that it does. It doesn't mean it has to be that way forever. We're at this historic moment where governments at all levels are investing a ton of money in infrastructure. And as Matti pointed out earlier, all kinds of infrastructure can create jobs. And we see that the Ford government has put a focus on transit-oriented communities as one of the ways it wants to move forward. And it'll be really interesting to watch how that's executed, because I think that, yeah, you're right. A lot of people do see that as the future. It doesn't solve everything.
Teresa, not everybody can afford a car. Lots of hidden costs with owning a car. And if newcomers are expected to live in these regions, it can take a long time for people to become established, build credit, be able to afford a vehicle. Is there a different way to approach getting people from A to B that's more inclusive?
And I think human behavior on all fronts, on the person who's, coming and deciding where to live in a city, to the heads of organizations that are moving industry, manufacturing, volume level jobs out of the city is also a factor. There's economics, there's, just decisions to be made. And so we've got a lot of factors that are impacting. So what we would like the ideal state to be is that there's enough jobs in each community that the people who live there can access those jobs. Even through the pandemic, there was, story after story about people deciding to trade in their condo or their home in the city and move outwards because now they're working remotely, and it's still early to determine whether we'll be working remotely still in the long term. I think we're looking at new models, and we like kind of the being at home to some extent. Some people hate it. We have the hybrid model coming into play. There's a lot of things you don't know, and it's a tough part for politicians. At some point, they put a stake in the sand to say this is what we're going to do and this is why. Yes, I'm sure the government has looked at its polling numbers to see what meets its supporters to determine that this is something that is important to them. There's a whole lot of factors that aren't easily played out, and so this live work thing is not even currently working in the city of Toronto. Reverse commuters, more, a lot of the lands that were for bigger volume jobs aren't here anymore.
And Emma, you mentioned earlier that this announcement came during the COP26 climate conference happening in Glasgow. And when we talk about the future, if we build a highway, the future for the environment might actually be, we might not realize the extent of what's coming next. The proposed Highway 413 is expected to run between farmlands and the Greenbelt situated between Caledon and Brampton. Emma, what are the most pressing environmental concerns about both Highway 413 and the Bradford bypass proposal?
I think the biggest thing with both the bypass and with Highway 413 is that they would run through the Greenbelt. People in Ontario, especially the greater Golden Horseshoe area, get very hyped up about the Greenbelt for good reason. It's this big ring of protected land, precious farmland, very sensitive ecosystem and forest. And if we harm that, that's damage that can't easily be undone. The issue of climate and carbon emissions from the new road is a major one that will have long-term consequences. And in terms of other impacts, this is going to eat up farmland. In the case of both highways, farmland that we need to have a local food supply. It's going to eat up sensitive wetlands. These are things that are very, very long-term consequences. Road salt pollution in waterways is another one that will impact endangered species. And maybe that's worth it for Ontarians, and maybe that's worth it for the government, but I think it's worth considering.
And Matti, we mentioned the timing of this, that this happened during COP26. What do you make of the timing of this announcement?
Well, the timing is just the complete opposite of what is being talked about at COP26, that we need to get our emissions under control, and that transportation is one of the major sectors. So in addition to electrifying our transportation network, we also need to be providing real alternatives to people. One of the most damaging aspects of this highway is the type of land use patterns that it will encourage. It will encourage the continuation of single-family, auto-oriented developments, not the types of intensification, the types of mixed uses that are needed. Surely we do have highways and we need them to move goods around and for people to move, but we need real alternatives. And building more highways doesn't solve that. It actually exacerbates the problem through the phenomenon of induced demand.
And Emma, a lot of people are saying that we do have a solution right now, and the solution is Highway 407. How could that be a solution, and why aren't we not focusing on that?
Well, as to the why we aren't focusing on it, I'm not sure. But in terms of how it could be a solution, certainly for the 413, it runs almost exactly parallel to the proposed route of the new highway. And in 2017, the Liberal government found that if they were to just subsidize tolls for trucks on the 407, that it would deliver very comparable benefits to the 413. When it comes to the Bradford bypass, the government commissioned a report in 2014 that looked at dozens of solutions that could also help the situation further north between the 400 and the 404, where the Bradford bypass is. Improving interchanges is one of those things. Widening the 400 is another thing, or existing east-west roads. A lot of those things have their own environmental impact and might not be ideal, but the footprint is smaller. And similar to the way that we think about like COVID restrictions, for example, we can do multi-layered things. And if we layer solutions, they together can make something comprehensive that can guide us to a better place. I think that's the way to think about this now.
Teresa?
Yeah, I mean, I think Emma makes a good point in that there are lots of solutions that all need to be worked together. Even some of the, in speaking to our CAA members, right? They know that there's not one solution that's going to fix all of this problem. We've put out reports in 2012 and 2017, and again in 2018 that says that that you need to look at a variety of things, and including optimizing the existing network, making transit a viable solution. And that's not just building, which definitely needs to be done, but getting the operation up and running so that people have a level of consistency that on one day it's taking them 30 minutes to get from one end to the other of where they're going. Another day it could take them an hour and 15. This lack of predictability also dissuades people from actually using transit as an alternative, because I think that part of it is you have to have the infrastructure. You have to make sure that we're using the infrastructure at the best possible in the best possible way, and then you have to support the behaviors to maximize all those things out there that now that you've given people the options and the predictability that need just for their own lifestyle and how they make choices.
We only have about 30 seconds left,
all.
and I wanted to get Matti in on this. Matti, you've the last 30 seconds.
Sure. The one idea that we haven't discussed is also about road tolls, and road tolls can play a very powerful role in managing demand for highways, achieving that smooth flow, and then funding the alternatives of public transit and the construction of complete communities. That was also in some of the earlier reporting on how what the alternatives are to Highway 413.
Teresa, Matti, and Emma, thank you so much. As I mentioned before we started taping, a bunch of us were talking about this, and this is definitely a hot button issue. And I'm sure we'll be talking about this in the months to come. Thank you so much for your insights. It's appreciated.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.